Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan take a look at the Twins' moves leading up to Spring Training 2025. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. We are back, Dan. It is almost time for spring training to begin. Pitchers and catchers report on Thursday, full squad workouts on Monday, and after that terribly boring Super Bowl, Dan, how excited are you for baseball?
Yeah, the Super Bowl wasn't obviously that fun. Did you have trouble picking a rooting interest, though? Because as a Vikings fan, I can't like either of those franchises, right? Historically?
No, you had texted which team my heart was with, and I responded, Dan, my heart was with the food table.
Yeah.
We had delicious food at the Super Bowl party we were at. I was not so interested in the game, actually, Dan. It was more, we had steak, we had chicken wings, we had the whole bit, Dan. It was great.
That does sound delicious. But yes, is there a spring training food that we should be eating to kind of like...
I think it's got to be fruit, right? Because you got like the grapefruit league. You'd think it'd be some
there you
form
go.
of
And the
form of
cactus.
citrus.
Like
yeah.
a prickly
can
pear.
You eat cactus?
Something.
Like
you can eat prickly pear.
Yeah,
I don't know
or,
how much
aloe?
of it
you don't really eat aloe, though. Oh, no, that makes tequila, right?
No, aloe's for the sunburns that you get when you're down there.
No, what's the alcohol that's made out of those plants?
It might be agave. Is that something? I don't know.
Yeah,
we're out of our depth here.
Oof.
David.
Oh man, Dan, we have gotten off track right off the bat here.
Not our best
goodness.
start. So yes, but the Twins finally. So I thought of the Twins actually this week when I was watching La La Land, which. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I did. Because I think it was like classic rope-a-dope. You know, this is what the Ryan Gosling character Sebastian says. Like, he's letting life punch him till it gets tired. And I think that's what the Twins were doing, is they were letting all of these free agents kind of like get taken. And then they picked up, Harrison Bader and Ty France and bringing back the cooler, Danny Coulombe.
Ogres are like onions.
Little inside baseball here, folks. Dan and I have a sharp disagreement on the merits of La La Land as an entertaining movie. And Dan tried his best to make that fit into this episode just to needle me a bit about this film that I think is not very good.
My students, we watched it. So I got to tell listeners. So we were watching this in my class to analyze the opening scene. And David texts back, were they being punished? Like... This is the kind of thing I have to deal with, listeners, is this man. Now, did you tell, this is not our normal format. So normally we have segments. There's more order to this. We don't get the insults in right away, Hogs and I. Hogs is our third chair. He'll come on occasionally, fill in for us or join us. So we're going to talk through, as David said, kind of these off-season moves a little bit before we really start hitting the ground here when spring training begins in earnest.
Yeah, I'm very excited, Dan. I will say the spring training hat, I'm always pretty excited to see. And that's one of the hats that I like to purchase because it's typically just a touch different than the regular season hats, but they usually have some sort of special flair or something. I hate this hat so much, Dan. It's red, it's the M logo, and then they have like this giant FL on the side of the head. And I absolutely hate it, Dan.
I mean, they don't have this new M logo on a red hat yet, right?
Well, I think it is unique in that way, but that doesn't make it any better, Dan.
No.
Let's jump straight into sort of the roster moves and the updates to contracts for your Twins team. First of all, to talk about arbitration, the Twins actually avoided arbitration with all 11 arbitration eligible players, which, Dan, to me means players knew they weren't worth any more than the Twins were offering, which, knowing how this front office had to be with their payroll in the offseason, that's not saying much, Dan.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll run through some of the numbers and then you can tell me if any kind of stand out as being too high or too low. If you were Mr. Arbitrator, Willie Castro, $6.4 million, Ryan Jeffers, 4.6, Johan Duran, 4.1, Bailey Ober, 3.6, projected 4.3. What do you mean by that there? Is that what he was? It was under by $700,000?
Yeah, that's what he was projected. I think it's either Fangraphs. I forget who does the projections for arbitration. I'm pretty sure it's Fangraphs, and they had him projected at $4.3 million.
Then there's Joy Ian. Is that like Joe Ryan's like alter ego or something rhyming like that? Like, who
Yes,
is
it's
Joy
clearly
Ian?
meant to be Joe Ryan, Dan.
Okay, sorry.
Chill.
Because sometimes with your typos here, I just can't quite tell, if it's
Dan, if you put
Cincinnati or if it's Cincinnati or whatever it is.
I would feel bad about this if you added one character to this spreadsheet, Dan.
I have a very good note here later about the umpire who got suspended, kicked out of baseball. Griffin Jacks, 2.4. Trevor Larnack, 2.1. Royce Lewis, 1.6. Justin Topo, 1.2. Michael Tonkin, 1.0. And Brock Stewart couldn't quite get to the million, 900,000 there. Any of those stand out?
He didn't pitch like at all, so it probably didn't help his cause here. Yeah, the standouts to me here are Jeffers, 4.6 million. I haven't looked at the comparisons, to be fair, so maybe that's a reasonable number. That seems a bit high for his output last season, but my goodness, Bailey Ober, $3.6 million, Dan, for a guy who honestly, I think he's going to absolutely destroy this season. I'm so excited for Bailey Ober. Obviously, my signed picture has increased my Bailey Ober fandom through the roof.
It's like a Paul Skeens card now you've got there, David.
3.6 million, doesn't that seem just like very, very cheap for a man of his caliber?
I think especially when you got Willie Castro making 6.4. Like,
yes!
I would, if you had flipped those, I would have thought, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Bailey must be even more angry that Rocco put him out there in that Atlanta game when the storm came through, right? And you were like trapped at the Chick-fil-A. Like, I mean, that is a low number. I was a little struck by Royce Lewis being only 1.6 million. I think it also speaks to the fact that maybe he's not as great as we all want him to be. You could play the sounder.
You were the chosen one.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as long as he's on the field, Dan, I think that's what really is going to matter here. But if you're not on the field, it's really hard to show your value.
Well, that's true. So I hope that he's able to get on the field and play more than the 160. Well, he can't play. I guess he could play more than 162 games if he. Maybe the Golden Bat thing. Maybe that would get him a couple more games played. That doesn't make sense. It would be the postseason. That's how. I'm sure Royce Lewis would love to play more than 162 games.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going.
I meant
along the way.
to say something else. Anyway.
Oof, Dan. Not mid-season form. It's preseason, folks. We haven't even started spring training technically yet. Please be gracious with us as we head into the season. So moving forward here into the moves that the Twins have made, you alluded to a couple of these, Dan. The first move they made in the offseason was they traded minor league right-handed pitcher Jose Vasquez. Probably not the only Vasquez to go this offseason. For catcher Diego Cartaya? I don't know how to say his name exactly, but he's a rising star with the Dodgers who he'd been sidelined with injuries, and he hadn't really lived up to the potential that the Dodgers had sort of seen in him. But he doesn't really have a path to the majors anymore because the Dodgers have Will Smith and then another guy who I forget off the top of my head. But I just think that this could be one of those pickups, Dan, that really helps solidify the major league catching position for this Twins team. If a guy can come here and sort of get back on the track that he once was as a top prospect in the Dodgers organization, how great that would be, because since your guy Joe Mauer, Dan, it's been a while since the Twins have had a good catcher who they can count on. I mean, I guess that's not exactly true because Mitch Garver really played well for a couple of seasons there. But to be fair, the season he played best is when they were playing with a bouncy ball. It didn't even really count as a season of baseball.
I don't think I need to be here, David, the way that you're posturing left and right here. You've got everything covered here. Yeah, I mean, Brian Jeffers is not obviously Joe Mauer. We'll see. They've flooded the market here because they also got Mickey Gasper earlier. We talked about him on a previous episode. So, they got four guys you could arguably, even Camargo, if he can actually learn how to hit a little bit. They got 5 catchers on the 40-man, so you would hope that one of them would hit. It does seem odd that they haven't been able to trade Christian Vasquez yet.
How is that odd? Exactly. Well, Dan, explain to me why that. What exactly are they trading him for, Dan? They're like, we will pay for his bus fare. That's about it.
No, I guess somebody must want a major league level catcher, right? I mean, like it's obviously it's the price tag. He's just too expensive.
Yeah, I don't know how much the Twins would be willing to eat, but I would guess a pretty decent chunk because he's not worth nearly $10 million. If he had to go through arbitration, Dan, I think the team would have asked him for money. Like, do you want to keep playing here? How much can you give us?
But hold on. I hope that he's able to have a better season. You just never know with guys the way that things happen.
Dan. Nobody wants him to have a bad season, Dan. It's just we've had 2 seasons and we haven't seen much out of him.
I don't know. I saw a walk-off home run when I was there. That was pretty fun. I guess that doesn't count as a large enough sample size to judge Christian Vasquez. So we'll see. But then that's just when things started to heat up. It was really this week because the Twins brought back Danny Coulombe, a lefty out of the bullpen. Curious, because then they got rid of all the other lefties. It's like there can only be one. But he got a 1-year, $3 million deal, which I thought was a pretty good deal considering how good he was for Baltimore just a year or two ago.
Yeah, if he can stay healthy, I mean, this is the motto of this Twins team. If he can stay healthy, if he can stay healthy, if he can stay healthy. If Danny Coulombe can stay healthy, though, Dan, $3 million is an absolute steal, I think, for the performance level that he brings, especially at a spot that was desperately needed because this bullpen really didn't have a true lefty. And the last guy, Dan, who we counted as a true lefty, I would argue not as helpful as some people saw him as.
Come on, is that a shot at Caleb Thielbar?
No, it was a shot at somebody else.
Well, would you rather have had Cody Funderburk or Caleb Thielbar last year?
Bring in Cody, baby. Caleb Thielbar gave up more home runs than I would, Dan. I think, honestly, like just playing soft toss.
But he was a couple bad outings, right? That really ruined him.
No, don't start this.
It's just like the Bailey Over stuff.
No.
So we'll see. But that's still not enough. Is it too much to ask to have two lefties in a bullpen?
Yeah.
But like major league wide, like is it that hard to be a relief pitcher who throws with his left arm instead of his right?
Well, yeah, because at this point, Dan, the way that the rules are set up where you have to face at least 3 guys or end the inning, it just doesn't make sense to have that many lefties out of the bullpen anymore.
Well, the Twins also made an outfield move, which reminded me of the Michael Taylor signing. They signed Harris and Bader on a 1-year deal with a mutual option for 26, and this just does feel like he's the backup. Right, for Buxton?
Oh, I think 100%. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time. I think even if Buxton is healthy, I think those scheduled off days are going to come into play. I think Bader's going to be in the field often. I don't see him getting a lot of DH spots, but I do see him coming in as a late defensive replacement if the Twins are up big or down big for Buxton, or again, if Buxton needs an off day. I love this signing. I know some people are like, well, his fielding wasn't great last year. Well, yeah, but over the course of his career, he's been fantastic in center field, and he's got to be better than anybody. You could take the combined skill level of everybody who played center field except for Byron Buxton for the Twins last season, and Bader is better than them. I guarantee it.
He gets $6.25 million at least. I guess there's some escalators. You can see some articles out there that move up to $7.75. So we're seeing some spending out of an ownership group that is, waving the goodbye flag, at least, if not the white one, which I think is nice. Is that Falvey just convincing ownership that it's worth it? Like, I'm impressed with the fact that they're doing this, but I am still surprised given what they said they wanted to do.
It makes zero sense with what they've said. But to be honest, should we ever believe what the Twins say to us? I mean, that's not something that we should do. But yeah, I agree. This is great. I love to see them spending some money, even if it's not obviously like Pete Alonso money, but just the fact that they're willing to put some money on the table.
See, I have La La Land and you have Pete. Like, that's how this works.
I would argue mine is much easier to connect to this podcast, Dan, but to each their own, I suppose.
You'd be surprised. And then the other move here, well, we'll get to the Ty France signing in a second or two, but Michael Hellman will not be playing backup center field for the Twins. He was traded to the Cardinals to make, basically for cash and to make room on the 40-man. And then also Ronnie Henriquez was designated for assignment. The Marlins picked him up. The Marlins have maybe not had the best luck with former Twins, given Nick Gordon and Luis. Well, they traded Luis Arias after they got him in the Lopez trade. So either of these problematic to you? Are you going to miss Ronnie? Are you going to miss Michael?
Who?
Yeah, well, I guess that answers the question there.
No, not at all. These are moves that are so far below the moves that matter, Dan. These are moves that only happen tangentially because of other moves that did matter took place.
I mean, but like, had this happened a week prior, like Aaron Gleeman would have had a whole article on The Athletic about it because it was the only
he had
move
nothing
the
else
Twins
to
were making.
write about.
I know that's what I'm talking about. And then the Twins signed Ty France to an interesting. I think it's only $1 million that they're paying him. There's nothing's guaranteed. Ty France was actually pretty good just a few years ago. He was an all-star in 2022. He had a great season, really, in 21 and 22 with a combined WAR of 7.5 over those 2 seasons. But he's really fallen off. He did have a heel injury, David, and I think if there's one thing that Minnesota's trainers have at least a track record of seeing, it's heels. So maybe this is the good spot for him. Like, we can say, like they can say to Ty, "Hey Ty, we know how this works."
I think it's interesting because I think when you see it come across your phone that like, hey, they signed Ty France, you're like, great, first base problem solved. And then you take a look at the numbers and you realize that he's not the best first baseman. And if you compare his numbers to the smaller sample size of Jose Miranda, they're not that far apart. Now, granted, Ty France has 1 billion more innings at first base than Jose Miranda does, and clearly he's going to be the superior defender there. However, this is definitely going to be a downgrade from Carlos Santana, but also the price tag is about $8 million cheaper.
What I don't get about these moves, and I talked a bit about this on the last episode, I think, was that is this demonstrably better than just letting your young guys play and seeing what you've got? Like, is Ty France the tipping point to make this a playoff team?
No, I do think the Harrison Bader signing is probably the most important here. I think the Coulombe signing is second most, and then the Ty France is third most, because I think first base, you had the most options of young guys to try out there, whereas center field, Dan, we tried that last season, and that was hard to watch, Dan Thompson.
Well, and anybody can play first base, David. I mean, how hard could it possibly be?
It's not that hard, Scott. Tell him, Wash.
It's incredibly hard.
I stand by, though. Like, I don't see what the point of this is. Like, play somebody else at first base. Play Blake Gasper. Bring Mickey Gasper up and see what he can do.
You couldn't even remember his first name.
Mickey Gasper. I got it. So it's confusing to me. Now, he is a right-handed bat, and the Twins, already have 7 of those in the starting lineup, so I don't quite get it that way either. I know that you're not saying that you're excited about it. I just see, what's the point of this signing? Is it just lightning in a bottle? I think it's $1 million. I mean, for a baseball organization, that's kind of nothing, but it still feels kind of like, somebody internally must be okay.
Yeah. I think at first base, like I said, I don't know.
We've been over this. I'm being belligerent, I guess, in my way. We've also seen, rumors, swirlings, noise that might be nothing. But the Twins were maybe trying to look for a solid defensive shortstop to protect in case that Carlos Correa has like a third ankle injury. Maybe he's got an elbow that maybe he gets too close to doing his yoga. He gets too close to his ankle or something like that.
I would assume they're concerned about the plantar fasciitis, but it might be some other made up injury that you're talking about.
I don't know. So same thing. Are they saying they have no backup shortstops on this roster? I thought Brooks Lee was. Royce Lewis was. I know that he's not going to play there now, but you have nobody else who can play shortstop?
I do think Brooks Lee is probably the natural candidate to move to short, but I think Brooks Lee has some work to do, Dan, and I don't know that they want him or Castro to take the majority of reps at shortstop until, first of all, Castro hasn't proven himself to be the best sure-handed shortstop, and Brooks Lee, Dan, as an all-around player right now, I don't think you can just count on him to go out there and be your everyday shortstop if Correa goes down for 4 weeks.
But if not now, then when? What is it going to take? How does a guy
Brooks Lee
get
is not
better?
the shortstop of the future, Dan.
No,
Carlos
but
Correa is here forever.
So then is Brooks Lee the second baseman of the future, essentially? Because then
potentially, yeah. I mean, I think ideally, actually, it was really interesting. Somebody, I think it was Dan Hayes, has an article, or maybe it was Keith Law actually at The Athletic, who looked at the 2027 Minnesota Twins, and they actually have Royce Lewis at first base. They have Brooks Lee at third, Carlos Correa at short, and then I forget who the infielder was, a minor league guy now. But it's that's looking 3 seasons from now, and that's who they have in their infield, which is sort of crazy to think about.
Well, I hope that those guys are all still with your organization and successful enough to be in the lineup at that point. Really, just that's really kind of it as far as moves. We've seen maybe some rumors about maybe Chris Paddock getting traded. I kind of like the depth of the starting rotation, given you don't have to look back very far to say, maybe kind of nice to have 7 viable major league starters.
It's pretty nuts when you look at the depth here, because you have Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Paddock, Woods, Richardson, and if you change out Paddock and Woods, Richardson for Festa and Matthews, I don't think I have a problem with that. And honestly, we're going to get to see Cantorino, and I have a soft spot for him because he's the board game guy.
He's a board game guy.
He's a board game guy. So he's the guy who I want to see on that mound more than anything. And Matt, if you're listening, I'm telling you, man, I have a great collection. It's heavily curated to be the greatest board game collection this side of Northeast Minneapolis.
That's good. Well, just a couple of the things that to talk roster-wise. Pablo Lopez was already named the opening day starter. Are they just trying to line up the Pablo days, with a new color, a green jersey this time?
For the record, folks, we have done a deep dive here. Pablo Day doesn't mean anything. It just means the day that Pablo pitches, which is just the silliest thing that I've ever heard. But I guess that's the way we're living our life, Dan.
But some other big news, so not on the roster, is we did finally get some clarity over the Twins TV deal. Now, this does not affect me, right? I'm still just, watching these out of market for, I think, $100 a season or something like that. But it seems that Major League Baseball, at least the Twins, have finally figured this out. David, you and Hogs get a discount to watch the Twins on what I have to pay.
Yes, so it will be $99.99 for the whole season to stream locally. They're still working out the TV details, whether it'll be on cable and satellite. But season ticket holders, depending on the plan size that you have, get a 25 to 50% off discount. And then also, as a season ticket holder, we still get MLB TV for free. So what that means is, for me, I'm only paying $50 for MLB TV and the Twins games. And what that means, Dan, what's most important to me, I get to cancel DirecTV, which is just a ridiculous bill to watch the Twins. And especially the way the last couple seasons have played out, where who knows if you'd actually get to watch them or not, depending on what happens with the dumb contract.
Have you tried to quit DirecTV before? It's not going to be easy. Like, you've seen the Friends episode, right? He's going to quit the gym. And
I want to quit the gym.
I think I'm still in the Godiva Coffee Club. Like, I don't know. Or Columbia House movies. Like, I'm still getting the mailings, David.
Dan's still getting Netflix delivered to his house. I just want to quit Netflix. I don't imagine that's going to be a fun phone call. I've been on the phone a lot with Verizon the last couple of weeks, so I don't really need to get into that, Dan. But I am excited, though. They had a really good article on The Athletic, and they talked about this guy, Fleck, I think is his name, who's going to be sort of heading up the
Fleck?
MLB TV. No, not PJ.
I read that whole article, and I was waiting for them to say, like, and this is the head coach's, the Gophers head coach's brother, cousin, or something like that. They didn't even acknowledge it.
Oh, no. But so anyway, is his name Fleck? I got his name.
His name
right?
is
Is that
Fleck.
what it was, right?
Yes, that was
okay.
Yeah.
Good deal. Okay,
not PJ.
But anyway, he was talking about how he's very excited because they have some new cameras that they're going to look at, and one of them is a wide-angled lens of the whole field, which I've often complained, Dan. The one thing that I don't like about watching games at home is you can't see how the defense is aligned.
Right.
And so now that you have a wide angle, you can actually see how the defense shifts depending who's up at the plate, which I'm pretty excited about. And then they also have one of those zipline cameras that they sort of use in NFL games. They've now got cameras running down the baselines, which should give some pretty cool angles of target field.
Two things about that. First, don't you hope that there's like a season ticket holder benefit where you get to ride that zip line like all the way over the field? Because I think that would be really cool. But the second thing, you didn't notice this, but in the article they talked about one of the benefits of that camera is that you will get to see the third base coach at all times when he is sending runners in, and like, this is going to be the best thing. We're going to get to see what Tommy Watkins was doing at every moment that he sends Ryan Jeffers from first base on a single to right. Like, we're going to get to see that it was Tommy who did that.
A couple of other notes
you
here,
have nothing?
on the
You have
broadcast.
no rebuttal?
No, I don't really want
Tommy?
to talk about Tommy Watkins until we have to, Dan. But this was kind of cool. In weather delays, because this is now owned by MLB TV, they can just switch to other teams in the Twins organization. So if, let's say, if the Saints are down in Omaha and the Twins are in a weather delay at home or away, they could just switch the feed to show the Saints game that's happening at the same time, which is super cool, Dan, and way better than I don't want to see Joe Mauer talking about Rod Carew for the 3 millionth time during a weather delay, Dan. There's only so many times you can hear guys talk about the good old days, and like Bert Blyleven setting guys' feet on fire. It's like, okay, we get it. You're an arsonist. Can we move on? Is the game back on yet?
They should just play all of those pregame, like, Hall of Fame or Twins Hall of Fame, Ring of Honor ceremonies that they do on the hottest day of the summer. It's like you're out. Oh, those are terrible.
Oh, quick side note. Corey Koski is being
speaking of, right?
inducted into the Twins Hall of Fame.
Because he had 3 good seasons for the Twins, apparently. That's
I know,
enough.
it's very confusing. The bar is not high. I'm pretty sure I'm being inducted next season, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Because you've clapped long enough and hard enough for the team? Is that what you get?
Yeah, but then another quick note here about the broadcast that does actually matter, depending how invested you are into the pregame shows, which for me, Dan, I would just throw them on, whatever, get the updates, see what Rocco has to say. There's not going to be any pregame shows on the road any longer, like none whatsoever. And then when they're home, it's only going to be a 15-minute pregame show. So those pregame and postgame shows that you're used to watching will no longer be there, which will be a little bit interesting. They said, Fleck in the article said that Audra Martin would play a much more pivotal role because a lot of the information she's giving, Dan, it's not going to be, oh, what's the greatest food at this ballpark? It's going to be stuff that actually pertains to what's happening on the field, which will be cool because because first of all, I think it lets her sort of express her range a little bit more on camera, and like people will be more invested. And secondly, I think that listening to those updates in game will sometimes get more people's attention on the items because not everybody's watching these pre-games, Dan.
But she only has 15 seconds for every update because of the pitch clock. So she's going to have to be very quick. I agree. I'm not going to miss those. They're just filler to me, really, most of the time. I would much rather have them play, they'll play the interview with Rocco or something like that pregame. I find that really interesting. I think the radio's still going to have that. So I'm all on board for all of that. But Roy Smalley, David, the way you have this written, I can't quite tell if you're being truthful or sarcastic. Roy Smalley, he wrote a nice note. You can find it on social media. I like Roy Smalley. You don't care for Roy?
He's fine. It's time for him to go, especially when you're like, oh, you know what? You can have Trevor Plouffe.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can have LaTroy Hawkins, and you can have Torrey Hunter, and you can have Denard Span. It's like, it's really hard to be like, yeah, give me Roy Smalley. Like, that's a hard one to swallow, I'd say. And like, Justin Morneau is fine, but like, he's so Canadian.
Oh, Canada.
I was just going to say boring,
and like,
but you kind of have conflated that with his nationality.
Which is the proper English rule here? Unexcitable?
Yeah, he's not. I mean, he's very
level
level-headed, and sometimes he's very informative, but he's better when Plouffe is in there to kind of needle him a little bit. And, as a contrast,
1,000%.
That's fantastic. So if we can get more, he is better when he's with somebody else, not because he's not informative and interesting, but because somebody else can be more interesting and also informative. That sounds like a cheap shot at Justin Morneau, doesn't it?
Oh, I was going to say it fits this podcast pretty well.
Anyway, what do we know?
It's interesting. C.S. Lewis has a book called The Four Loves, and he talks about how relationally it can be very interesting how much you enjoy someone based upon the company with which you're participating. So like A and B may get along, but A and B plus C means that A and B no longer get along.
I thought that's a commutative
so, like,
property
understanding
or something like that. It's not a mathematical formula.
Yeah, it's interesting. But regardless, yes, I agree that Justin Morneau is better when somebody else is there to talk over him. Is that what you said?
Another note on the season ticket holders. So this made me laugh when you told me this a couple days ago. So when I was a season ticket holder, I don't know, 8 years ago now, there were 5 tiers, right? They had different colors. There was like green and yellow, and there was red and blue and purple, or what, I forget it was. And then they simplified, and this is for pricing, right? The idea of the Yankees come to town, doesn't matter when, or your summer Saturday games are all going to be more expensive, right? And then they went down to 3, but apparently they have reversed course, and they're doubling. They have 9 tiers now.
I get this email, Dan, and it's honestly, it's a beautiful mind to try and figure this thing out, man. There is colors all over this thing. If I made something at work that had this many colors on it, I would be fired immediately. They would say, what have you done? Why are you using so much color? This is ridiculous. 9 tiers is a bit over the top. Now, to their credit, they included in each of the tiers the dollar value of each of the seats, and they normally, you could get that information, but it was a pain. This one, they just included it outright. Nice. They said, hey, here's the tier schedule. Here's how much the seats are worth. You can transfer tickets as you like. You can, change into a more expensive game and pay the difference, go to a lesser game and then get better seats, so on and so forth. So kudos to the team for that. But 9 tiers, dude, is just like, I don't want to bust out a calculator to figure out how many seats I need to which games and like which ones to transfer in and out of. And they're just making that a little bit too complicated for my liking.
Well, we'll see how it works out when I'm planning my visit back. I guess I'll have to take into account, whether I'm tier 3, tier 5, tier 8, tier 9 games. It does feel a little ridiculous. Another former Twin update, Ahire Adrianza. I was going to say that because I didn't want to have to make you try to sound out his name there.
Thank you.
He is joining the Twins.
I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Ere.
Ere?
I don't know what you said.
What do I know? I got the Adrianza part right. He is back as an assistant of player development. It seems like he might be one of those young coaches that's on the rise. But I like when they bring a guy back like this. And he actually, he made the most of his career. And I don't mean that as a slight. I mean, he was in the league for a long time. He played for a lot of good teams. I like this. I like this hiring.
Yeah, not bad. Another former Twins update. Jorge Polanco re-signs with the Mariners, Dan, for $7.75 million, which good on him, man. But my goodness, if that was the arbitration number that was up above that we were talking about, I would say that's a bit over for a guy who played 4 innings last season.
A lot of questions about that out here in Seattle, but I think the conversation has been, who else? Who else is out there? So I think Jorge is taking advantage of a market that doesn't have a lot of guys quite like him. So I think that's probably why he's getting all that money.
Yeah, and I hope he plays well. I mean, I've always been a
Totally.
Jorge fan. Love it. I hope he bounces back. He stays healthy. But yeah, it does seem like they're overpaying for a guy because the market is that thin.
And then before we get back to a couple final Twins notes here, looking around the league, I found this really interesting. So if you're an Athletic subscriber, you should read the article about Paul Skeen's 1-of-1 card that was found. And I think they did a really good job of reporting kind of how that came together. But it was found by an 11-year-old boy in Los Angeles. The family ended up putting the card up for auction. So the team offered in exchange for the card, if this whoever had found it was
What made the card so interesting?
well, it's something like it's a 1-of-1 rookie debut patch, and it's just one of these special cards. And obviously, if Paul Skeens has a terrible career, this card will be worth not very much down the road. But the idea is that it's super valuable. He could be, who knows? I mean, anybody could be a Hall of Famer, I guess, after one season, but he has the trajectory. But the Pirates offered 2 season tickets behind home plate for the next 30 years at PNC Park, a softball game for 30 at PNC, coaching from Pirates alumni, a meet and greet with Paul Skeens, a couple autographed jerseys, more things. But the problem with this offer is that what are the odds that somebody who's a Pirates fan is going to get the card? Like, could they not work with the Dodgers? So I guess that would be my question. If you had this given to you, what would you take the deal, or would you put the card up for $1 million and just buy your own gift package with that?
Oh, Dan, that card is sold so fast.
Yeah.
You would, I mean,
Yeah.
If the Twins came to me and they said, hey, you know what, we're going to give you Champions Club tickets for the rest of your life, well, maybe there's something to consider. But again, I still think you take the money and run at this point. I don't think it's worth it no matter what that team offers you. That's a really cool package that they offered, Dan. But I just think it's too much money on the table right now that can be used in other things that aren't baseball. And you know me, I know you, we love baseball, Dan. But when you can have a life-changing amount of money and you can buy basically to sit wherever you want, whenever you go to a baseball game, I think that's the wise choice here.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of there's a Home Improvement episode where Tim has to make a split decision whether to buy Detroit Pistons season tickets. And of course he does. And then he has to walk it back considerably once he goes home to Jill. And I'm just thinking, if I had this choice and I made this decision to say, well, I'm going to take the deal from the Twins here, I don't think that would be very well received at home. Like you said, there's a lot of baseball games you could go to for $1 million, I would think, at that point.
Yeah.
So I think they'd have to give me a lot more. But even then, I don't think I could make it up fast enough to be able to do that. So I don't know. And then another thing that I thought was interesting. So MLB umpire Pat Hoberg was fired for being associated with someone who bet on baseball. Now, this is interesting. He shared a betting account with a pro poker player, and apparently some of the bets were made by the poker player when he was staying at Hoberg's house in Iowa. I don't have a tinfoil hat, David, that I put on very often here. But this does seem to be one of those situations where it's like, if you're an umpire and you've got a pro poker player who you share an account, there's so many points at which that your red flare should be sent up during this to say maybe this isn't a good idea. Why did this get so deep?
If I can give you an example, imagine it was a baseball player who had someone who he was very close with in his life. Maybe not even a friend, someone who you were with every day, like an interpreter, maybe. And maybe that interpreter was placing a whole bunch of bets with not only their own money, Dan, but your money, actually. It
Cleared
is
of all
odd
charges.
how something like that.
A federal judge has ruled.
The hypocrisy here is absolutely insane, Dan. There was a full investigation. Do you know how much money Rob Manfred paid the FBI to be like, you know what? Let's just make sure Shohei, he didn't place any bets. I'm so sure of it. But one umpire shares it. Now, granted, this is just as dumb. Don't get me wrong. But again, you're saying you're not tinfoil-y, Dan. To imagine, again, the tinfoil it takes to imagine that Shohei Ohtani had no idea about these millions of dollars being bet from his account is the most ridiculous notion I've ever heard.
Well, and a couple clarifications. So he was betting on things. Hoberg himself admits he was betting on other sports. The problem is with the betting on baseball. I think even some of the games that he was umpiring. Now, he claims that he didn't know about these things and that this was just his poker buddy that shares the account with him. But it's just buddy, don't you have to have some better discernment and judgment here?
Okay, first of all, and you're a grown
Yes.
man. How weird would it be, Dan, if I was like, "Hey, man, do you want to open a DraftKings account with me?" You'd be like, "Okay."
I wouldn't open a DraftKings account with you, let alone somebody
be...
who's a professional poker player. Anyway.
Yeah, you'd lose your money so fast, Dan. I am so bad at betting on F1. It's not even funny at this point.
It's just nuts.
The only time I won is when I misunderstood the rules and I won doing the opposite of what I thought I was doing, Dan. It's the George Costanza betting.
That's what he thinks. Anyway, so those are just a couple things around baseball. But I more seriously, I do find the infiltration of gambling into sports super troubling. We're going to keep finding more instances like this, and it's not going to be good. We are a podcast that appreciates well-played baseball, no matter who does it, and it saddens me to see people's lives ruined betting on sports. It's meant to be a game. It's not meant to be an income. So anyway, that's at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's to the point now where they need to start putting in rules in place that are directly applied to everybody across the board. Like, there needs to be examples of, if you do this, this is the penalty, and they can't be treating different players differently as much as they want to. Like, if one is, like, let's say the best player in baseball right now and somebody who everybody looks up to who happens to have an interpreter who places those bets,
let's just say that happened to be
let's just say that were to happen, Dan.
There he is, beating that dead horse.
No, but I do think they need to have strict rules in place. They need to rule this with an iron fist and make sure that they put a stop to it as early as possible for guys to realize that you can't keep doing this and getting away with it. And like, you may be banned. I mean, it may be Pete Rose all over again.
Well, a couple lighter notes to end this on here. So one of the things that if you're a Major League Baseball player, you get to do in the offseason occasionally is get married, right? Because that's your time. Like, you can't say, "Hey, sorry, Twins, we found a really nice venue, but they're only available, in August. It's that Saturday in August. Is that third one? Is that going to be okay?" So we need to offer some congratulations. Trevor Larnach and Royce Lewis got married over the offseason, so we can be expecting the announcement that they obviously had twins, like at some point here. Like, this is what you do, right?
Has to be done, Dan.
And then also Joe Ryan apparently proposed in an adorable way. I can't bring myself to say the C word here that's on the spreadsheet. I just don't like.
I wrote cutest, Dan. It was the cutest
I just don't
way
like
ever.
that word. So how about you go ahead and you explain how Joe did this?
Yeah, so Joe Ryan's fiance now, girlfriend at the time, her grandfather had passed away. And I guess they were very close and they'd spent a lot of time together and he was one of her favorite people. So what Joe did is he had set up this beautiful tent with these beautiful white twinkle lights and a beautiful dinner in the backyard of the grandparents, and he was actually wearing one of the favorite sweaters of his girlfriend's grandfather when he proposed, which is it's really cool. And I think one thing that story sort of shows is obviously he knows her very well, and he cares about her in such a way because he knows how much that man meant to her. And so to include him in a proposal, now knowing that he won't be there for the wedding and stuff, I'm sure is something that she'll be happy to tell that story for the rest of her life.
I'm sure it's better than our proposal stories, I would imagine.
I'll speak for yourself, Dan. I am.
All right. We will save that story for another episode. So yeah, I guess that about covers all the things that we wanted to talk about on this episode, David. We are going to have lots more to say here now as the Twins open spring training this week.
Yeah, so we'll have another episode here where we break down the roster, who's in camp, the non-roster invitees, sort of break down the battles. To be honest, Dan, I don't mean to give away too much. There's not all that many battles to take place. Maybe a couple of bullpen spots potentially, and then that last spot on the roster I think will be hotly contested. So much of this depends, Dan, obviously on health, but also who's going to play those infield positions, Dan, especially now that it seems that first base and shortstop are off the table.
Yeah, we're going to wait and see. And so, listeners, we hope you'll stick with us here as we get into the season. Our regular format is to have an episode every series. I believe last season we did that. I think we've had a good track record so far. So we appreciate everybody listening and encourages us to keep doing this. And we're excited, I think, to watch some baseball and get to talk about some baseball here, David.
Absolutely. Well, I'll send us out, Dan. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Men for the Win and find our Men for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins!
That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.